Hello and welcome to the Wedding Dish Podcast. Grab your fork and knife and take a seat at our table as we dish on all things weddings. You'll hear stories and tips from real couples and wedding pros about love, life, and entrepreneurship. Let's dish. I am Sarah Alpin. I'm the host of The Wedding Dish and the CEO of Photos from the Harty and District Bliss. And today we have a really exciting guest here. So it is really important to think about so many pieces of weddings, right? Like we know this. And today we're actually going to be talking about a little bit of a departure from our normal, planning process. We are speaking with the tent guy, Adam Keller. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the pieces that kind of go a little bit unplanned for until you start thinking about maybe plan B sometimes, or when you're talking about when you actually know you need a tent, but it's kind of one of the later pieces in the wedding planning process. So I'm really excited for you to share this info with everybody.
Right. You say later pieces in the process. If you're planning on having a wedding in your backyard, it should be the first thing you do.
Yeah, but I think it's also one of the things people don't think about until they get further in to the planning process. That's one of the reasons I think it's so great you're here.
Yeah. So if you are going to have an outdoor wedding anywhere, and you're in a climate where you need a tent, where it's going to rain or it's really hot and you want shade, the second you decide that you're going to have the wedding outdoors, you call the rental company.
Yeah, for sure. And for a whole onslaught of reasons. So let's start there. Why is it so important to think about the tent as one of the first pieces?
So it's common. A lot of people will call with 2 months left. They left it to the last piece. They got everything else. They just assume that the rental companies have a billion tents waiting. When our goal really is to get reservations so that we're guaranteed we know what is going out. So it's just like any other wedding. People may be booking a venue a year in advance, a year and a half. The tent is the venue basically, and the people who are on top of things are booking us a year to 2 years in advance. 2 years is kind of extreme, but usually a year in advance. So for the people who are waiting for 3 months in advance, I'm sorry, we've already reserved the things and promised stuff to other people. I mean, if we have something, yes, we're going to do it, but our goal is not to have something by that time.
Yeah, so consider this your PSA if you're planning your wedding. If you want the tent you want, you need to plan for it early. And that's another piece of the pie that I want to talk to you about too. So there are a lot of different types of tents. Can you kind of talk about the benefits of having a traditional tent versus a clear top tent?
Yeah, so the most common tent is going to be called your pole tent. It's going to be able to go up in people's backyards where there's grass, where you can put stakes into the ground, because the pole tent is held up by center poles and tension. So the stakes are holding the center poles in place with the tension to the side. That's going to be your least expensive option. Those are always, there's no clear in those because the tension would rip the clear. Then the next option is going to be a frame tent. Frame tent can be staked. It can go anywhere. It can be staked in the grass. There's way less stakes, but it can also go on pavement. It can go on, the top of a building, like a big deck up there. It's more versatile. It is a whole lot more expensive, but there's no longer tension involved in there. So the frame is the structure, and the vinyl is on top of the frame. So then you can get a clear tent. The thing to think about with clear tents is it's a greenhouse. So they're not really that great in June and July. They're better in the early months. I'm in New York, so I'm kind of going from that perspective. It's better in the spring and the fall, or cooler times. If you are going to be doing it in the middle of the hot season, you're going to need expensive AC units, and it's not just a unit that's at your house. It's a big tow behind unit. It's going to cost a lot of money to get, and depending on your area in the country, not every city has it, because it's a very expensive item to buy and thus rent. So you're gonna have to go to like probably the largest city near you and see if someone has that and get it trucked in. And they're very expensive. So clear, although it's wicked cool, has its downsides and a lot of added expense to it depending on the time of year. And then there's another one called Sailcloth Tents, which is all the rage. They're basically the same size as any other tent. They're made with a slightly different material. And for us on our end, it costs about 3 to 5 times more to buy the same size tent in sailcloth. So if you want a sailcloth look, it's going to cost you 3 to 5 times more to rent that same size tent, but in sailcloth.
Interesting. Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that, because I can't even picture it.
So it's more of a translucent material. So during the day, there's not really much of a look to it that's much different. But at night, when you take those outside photos, the lights and everything that's inside the tent is basically shining through the ceiling. It's more translucent. It's not clear. It just allows light through. Whereas most tent material is called blackout. It doesn't let light through.
Okay, that's so interesting. And now that you say that, I have seen that. I've photographed a couple weddings with those, but I didn't really register that there was a particular difference. It does look really cool at night.
It does, but you're paying about 5 times more for the same size tent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true. And it's good to go in knowing that and expecting it. Are those waterproof?
So no tent is waterproof. It's just
or
vinyl.
Resistant.
Yeah, that's what everyone says. That's what we all put in our contracts, that tents are water resistant, because these really, really big tents are not one piece. They have sections that we put together on site, on the ground, and then put back up. So there is lace lines where sections come together, and water can get in. It's not like raining in there, but if it's a torrential downpour all day long, you're going to get some drips. So tents are water resistant, not waterproof.
That is a great distinction. I think the only time that we had water that I saw coming in a tent was when it was during a hurricane. And honestly, the floor was all flooded out anyway, like the grass underneath. So it wasn't a big deal that there were some drips.
Yeah. No.
Your feet were soaked anyway.
Right. If you're renting a tent, you're mostly staying dry. It's in the extreme conditions where some water will get through. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so fascinating. So the other cool thing, I mean, obviously all of these have like really awesome benefits, and also, everything, just like everything, you get what you pay for, and you are going to have some cons with each style as well. And I know you were talking about the clear tent being kind of a greenhouse, and the need for the air conditioning unit. 2 things with the air conditioning unit that I just want to make sure we point out here. One, they can be very loud. So just like keep that in the back of your mind if you are planning that type of wedding. And even if you need it for any type of tent, it's going to be kind of loud. So you should make sure you factor that in. And they are large. So it is going to take up a big piece of the underneath of the tent. So just, as you plan, make sure you have those 2 pieces in your brain, especially if you don't have a planner who's helping you guide you through all those pieces. The other thing with the clear tent is that it provides no shade. I know this seems like an obvious point, but I would just want to make sure it's clear. So it protects you from elements in terms of like, if it's raining, it should protect you from that. Obviously water resistant, not waterproof, but I just want to make sure we point that out to everybody, that's the purpose of the clear tent.
Yeah, it's much better at night. So if your wedding is going to start later and end later, that's when it's cool, because then you can see the whole night sky. But if your wedding is at noon, it's not that great. And these tents are getting set up several days in advance. So the days that people are coming in to set up, whether that's the couple or some sort of planner, it's hot in there. And you're not going to be running an AC the entire time. You're just going to run it the day of the event. And on the ACs, like, you can mitigate the sound because they are tow behind. So it's on a trailer. it can be pretty far away with ducting that comes to the tent, but you're going to be paying more for the ducting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Great point. I appreciate you making that clarification. Um, so in terms of renting tents, if you were to give any advice other than obviously do it early,
Right.
for wedding couples planning their weddings, what would be some advice you would impart upon them when considering the type of tent, and their environment that they're planning their wedding in?
Okay, so the first thing, I'll do the type of tent after, but the first initial stages. So you decided you're going to have an outdoor event. You got to figure out, space and all these other things. Don't use an online calculator. There's a lot of online calculators that, you go in, punch in how many people you have, and then it tells you what big tent you need. However, they suck. They're horrible.
That's unfortunate.
There's a lot of things that you need to think of. So when you call us, you tell us their date, how many people you have, and then a good rental company is going to ask you a bunch of follow-up questions, like, do you need room for a dance floor? Whether you're renting a dance floor or just dancing on the grass, we need to account for that based on the number of guests that you have. Are you doing a head table, a sweetheart table, or sitting amongst your guests? Because if you're doing a head table with 14 people at it, head tables are gigantic, and it basically eats room from other tables. So if you had a sweetheart table, you could fit 25 extra people in the tent. If you got a head table, now you need a bigger tent to fit those same 25 people. We need to know, is it sit-down service? Is it buffet? What kind of service is it? Do we need to account for buffet tables? We need to know what kind of bar service you're having. Do they have a big back bar? How long the bar do you want? Whether you're renting a bar from us or you're hiring a service in. We need to know cake table, gift table. We need to know as much information as you can so that we can then decide what size tent you need. Because the last thing any rental company wants to do is show up based on you just say, I need a 40 by 80 tent, and we set it up, and you go, putting all your tables and stuff around, and then you're like, wow, we do not have any more room, and then you're mad at us. So we want to get you in the right size tent. We actually want to give you a little bit more room than you need, just because it's always nicer to have more room than less room. So call us, and then we will get you in the right size tent. Don't just call us and say, I need this size tent, because most likely you're wrong, and that's going to make your wedding suffer in the end.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably the only time that there are going to be outliers out there who rent tents for their events that they host, or work for a company where they have to rent tents for fundraising events or something like that. But for the most part, this is the first time that you're experiencing renting this type of tent, and needing to plan for those logistics. So, and this is something that I often find comes up in this podcast on the Wedding Dish, is you really need to communicate with your professionals and trust your professionals. It's very rare that somebody is going to recommend like the largest tent humanly possible. Just, they're not going to do, like, that's a bad customer experience. They want their clients to be, everybody wants their clients to be happy. So trusting your professionals and asking questions if you feel like you may need, a little bit more clarity on something. But nobody, if it's raining, if there's a reason that, you have a tent, that you really need the tent as opposed to want the tent, you don't want your bartender outside, because nobody's going to want to go stand in the rain to go get themselves a drink.
Right.
And also, and then, okay, so then you're putting up a pop-up tent that doesn't necessarily look great. So that kind of thing can be, and even then, if they're further back from the tent, you're still going to be asking your guests to walk in the rain. So those are really important things to consider, and maybe stuff that falls off our list. Because again, generally speaking, first time you're renting a tent and having a bartender and a dance floor.
Right. Yeah, just give us as much information as you can. And you mentioned a good word, logistics. I have that in my notes. You got to let us know the location logistics too, because rental companies just assume it's in their contract. Like, our delivery is to a convenient location. So if your wedding is in the backyard, we're in your driveway going around your house. But if you're at a place where, you have a bunch of steps down to a tennis court, or you're actually like half a mile back in the woods, or where you're at, say you're not getting a tent, we're just renting other things, there's an elevator, or any sort of delivery logistics, that causes time on our end. And you want to let us know that so we can give you the appropriate price, as opposed to us showing up and then the entire crew that's there just having like a bad morale. You don't want your rental crew to really hate your location. If they know what it is going in, then they're fine with it. And if we show up and it's like, wow, there's 4 flights of stairs down to a tennis court by the lake, and we got to carry everything, we're going to say, okay, so your bill is now $2,000 more.
Well, and to add on to that, you may not have your tent set up in time.
Right. Well,
so, and you're not gonna avoid fees by not telling people. That's the other thing, right? Like, you sign a contract, so it's not. It's like the old myth where if you tell your photographer that it's a family gathering versus a wedding, they're going to charge differently. That isn't accurate. And maybe that was way before I started wedding photography in 2005. It's totally possible that was accurate. But people told me that when I was getting married, and that was like but it's the same with, if there are going to be fees, the fees are going to be there regardless. So you want to have everybody that's coming to vend at your wedding to work with you, to work for you. You want them to all be, first of all, have a great experience, because you want the vibes around your wedding to be really positive. And then also to have the appropriate amount of time, equipment, all the things that they need in order to get set up, because the last thing you want is your wedding to be like an hour and a half late because you didn't tell the tent installation team that they needed to hike half a mile into the woods.
Yeah, on that, that's a very good point. Most rental companies for like a big wedding tent are going to set up well in advance. So if you're getting married at a location that's not yours, where they say you have to set the tent up that morning and take it down that night, that is a big thing. You need to tell them immediately. I personally turn all those down because it takes about 5 hours to set up a wedding tent. And then when the wedding's done at 11 o'clock, I don't want to be taking it down that night. So a lot of companies actually just don't do it. So we actually set up tents on Wednesday and then take them down either Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. Now, if you're doing a very complicated setup where you have like uneven ground, where you're building an entire floor that's completely level, you got a lot of crazy stuff, the company may come in a week and a half in advance because it's going to take a week to prep everything. So that's another thing a lot of people don't think about, is the time frame for these. So get on page with your rental company when these tents are usually set up. We don't really give you times 6 months, a year out, because we're waiting until we're closer so we know all the logistics of everything we're doing, because it's not just your wedding. But get a general idea of when setup is. It's not so important if it's in your backyard, but it is very important if you're renting space from somewhere else, to be on the same page. And definitely try not to book those places where it's same day in, same day out, because it's a logistical nightmare for everyone involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you're doing like a plan B, maybe you need a tent kind of situation, which I guess actually let's address that. The plan B, maybe you need a tent. How does that work?
Yeah. So you maybe need a tent for your ceremony. Maybe your reception's inside it somewhere, but on ceremonies outside, you're going to book the tent with someone as a backup, as a plan B. And then every company is going to be a little different. My company is, if you need it, we're going to set it up. If you don't need it, you're still going to pay 50% of it. You're 50% of your order. That's because it's a reservation. Our job is to take reservations and promise tents to people and not let other people get those tents. Someone put their money down on it, that tent can no longer go out. Yeah. So the rental company could have missed out on a whole bunch of other opportunities to get that tent out. with various other stuff under it. So we're missing out on that opportunity by promising you, by guaranteeing you that if you need a tent, you have a tent. So it's kind of like an insurance policy. If you end up not needing it, you don't pay for the whole thing, at least in my company. You're just still going to pay with part of it. So.
Yeah. And so generally speaking, how long out does the couple need to make the decision if they are going to actually need the tent?
With my company, it's the day before setup when we tell you when we're going to set up. I said I don't do any same day setup takedowns. So if there is a rain tent, we're doing it the day before. We're not doing it the day of. So if we told you we're setting up Friday, you need to tell us Thursday that you don't want it anymore. Some other companies might be a little harder with that. Some companies have, if the truck is loaded, it's paid for. You got to pay for it. So if it's a really, really big company and they have lots and lots of trucks and they're loading things up throughout the week, so it's ready to go out on Friday. If they've loaded it on Tuesday, then you're paying for it. And so get with your company on what their policy is.
That is such good insight, because I obviously don't plan weddings, and I got married in Paso Robles where it rains 11 days out of the year in California. And so we didn't really have a plan B situation, and we didn't have a tent because it was kind of in the woods. So I assumed that you needed to make the call 2 weeks out.
Oh, like a call to get one?
Well, like if you needed to make like the plan B call.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you can call any rental company. If they have it sitting on the shelves, they're going to do it. But it's better to have the plan B reservation, because you may call and no rental companies have any tents left, because like I said, our goal is to have stuff reserved, not to have anything left.
Yeah, I thought you had to cancel if you were going to like get any, if you needed, like, whether or not, like, of course you will have reserved it in advance because you will have listened to this podcast and you need to reserve your tent in advance.
Right.
But I thought you needed to make the decision whether or not you were going with plan A or plan B 2 weeks out.
Oh, well, that can vary. This is not like universal across rental companies, but 2 weeks out would be definitely for like, I don't need these tables, these chairs, blah, blah, blah. But the rain one is really like, that's hard to do 2 weeks out.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. So that's actually, I mean, that's kind of a relief, and it that offers a lot more peace of mind, I would imagine, for couples.
We actually like them when it's just a tent for over a ceremony, and that's really all you're renting from us. If it's going to rain and you don't need it, we actually like those phone calls, because then it's free money basically.
Well, it was a reservation.
Yes. No, but where we wouldn't like it though is if it was the entire wedding, where it was the tent, all the tables, all the chairs, all the linens, all the dishes, all that, and then you canceled. Then we're just like, oh man, that was a big hit. But either way, you make your reservation, it's promised to you.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it would be really unfortunate if you made your reservation and then, like, who would want their money back versus like not having the tent be available when you actually needed to use the tent.
Right. Another thing that kind of goes in with this is sides, heaters, and we'll throw AC into this. So you make your wedding plans a year in advance, or 6 months, or anytime. And you're like, well, I don't know about sides, I don't know about heater, I don't know about AC. Can we just wait till that week? Yes, you can. But the thing is, you got to understand, you're not the only person who's renting equipment. There's a lot of people. Come that week, if it's going to rain, everyone is calling. Or by that time, there's been people who have already reserved the sides, the heater, the AC. And honestly, no rental company has enough sides for every single one of their tents, because like a lot of graduations or smaller parties, they don't get sides at all. So if we had sides for every tent, it's not economical for us to do that. So we have, 50 to 75%. So sides, heaters, and ACs are kind of like insurance. It's better to have them and not use them than to need them. And then you call every rental company in your area and no one has sides.
Yeah.
I rent out my sides all the time to other companies too, because they ran out of sides, 6 months ago, and they don't want to turn down a $5,000 wedding because they don't have 40 feet of sides. So not only am I promising sides to customers, I'm helping out my friendly competition, and giving them sides. So by the time you call for the sides that you were trying to save money on, if you didn't need them, they're already gone, and now you're wet.
Oh, that's such a good point. Or cold. I mean, this is the coldest winter on record in years on the
Right.
East Coast. It's like 20 degrees here today, although it is 3 degrees in Wisconsin, so I really can't complain.
Right. I don't know what it is here. I don't pay attention to the weather in the winter because the weather in the summer causes me so much stress that in the winter I just check out. I don't care.
Well, your job is so weather dependent. You have to really like think about all of the pieces. I mean, it's different for me. I show up and it's kind of like it is what it is. I have a hood for my camera if it's raining, and like I've got a really good rain suit if I need to be in the rain. But
Right.
I mean, that's not, of course, your guests are probably not showing up in that condition.
No. As a tent company, we're scared of the wind, so I'm always looking for the wind. Usually there's wind associated with rain.
Ah, that is true, especially on the East Coast. That's a big
Exactly.
point. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're going to take a super fast break on the wedding dish, and then I will be back with the tent guy, Adam Keller, in a couple seconds. And we are back on the wedding dish. I am your hostess with the mostest, Sarah Alapin. And today I am joined by Adam, who is the guy behind the tent guy. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, you've been sharing such great information. And we were talking a little bit on the break. You made some good points and you brought some things into my brain that I had kind of just buried somewhere. And they're really important pieces. So let's talk a little bit about catering and catering staff and their needs for rentals.
Yeah, so obviously you need food. That's the biggest part of the wedding for most people. So there's various ways it's going to happen. You're either going to be at a venue who already has their food, but if you're having a catering situation where you're at a barn or your own backyard or a park or wherever, someplace that just doesn't have a catering staff, then you're going to need to hire a caterer. Now, the caterer may handle all this himself or herself. They may have the equipment, but in most cases they don't because they're caterers. They like to cook food. That's what they do. And they don't want to show up and set up a kitchen. So they're going to get rentals. They may directly contact the rental company or have one that they work with and then either upcharge the couple or just tell the couple what they owe or have the couple contact the company to pay. Or they may require the couple does everything. They'll tell you everything that they need, and then the couple just contacts the rental company and gets that. Yeah, it's a big piece. It is pretty expensive. It needs a tent, it needs sides, they need lights, and then they need an oven, a grill, refrigerator, a hot box, and then a lot of times, they don't have dishes. They don't want to be cleaning, 500 dishes every single event. They usually rent them. So then you're going to have a cost of dishes and glassware maybe in there. So it's definitely something to consider. If you're having your wedding in some place where you're going to need to do that, it's going to add quite a bit to your wedding on top of just the catering bill.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception where some of these venues are more economical, right? Like a barn is economical, or a park is economical. Well, the reason being that they may or may not have bathrooms, they may or may not have a kitchen, and those are two. So as much as you may save money, there are also other costs. So, make sure as you budget for those things that you factor that in, because the worst is not realizing it and then breaking your budget on, or not having the budget for it at the last minute. So, um, and then So generally speaking, we were talking about this on the break, so I know I'm leading you here, but
Right.
generally speaking, um, how would you know your caterer needs a tent or any sort of equipment that to be rented by the couple?
Well, you don't, because we were talking about this one caterer in my area who doesn't let the couple know. They have it like buried in their contract, like, and it's not very good wording that the couple's responsible for the rentals. They don't really let people know until like 2 weeks, like, this is what we need. So if you're getting a caterer, just immediately ask, like,
Yeah.
are we going to have to pay for rentals? Are you going to need them? You know, it's the same thing with us. We want to know logistics, and then you're going to want to know logistics from your caterer. So just ask them all the requirements. Ask them if you're responsible for paying for the rentals, or if it's just built into the bill already. Don't just assume your caterer. I mean, you would just think that if you hire a caterer that you're going to get your food cooked, but there's things behind the scenes. So just ask them. Just immediately get into it if your venue doesn't have a kitchen.
Yeah. And hopefully they tell you without, but it is better to actually ask the question than it is to find out 2 weeks out from your wedding that you need to scramble to find a kitchen that, is probably already rented, because as we've discussed, this stuff should be done in advance. So,
Yes.
and then, so we're talking about contracts, and the importance of actually reading the contract. There are a lot of different laws in different states and things, and of course we are not lawyers. we
Right.
we are not pretending to be lawyers on this podcast either. But did you have any recommendations for people as they go through their rental contracts? Any like red flags or anything that they should look for or be aware of?
Not really, except you just need to read it entirely. Every rental company is going to have a different contract. It's not across the board. I change my rental contract almost every like 2 to 3 weeks because we show up and someone did something stupid. And we're like, well, I guess we got to put that in the contract.
Yep.
Or we show up and someone wants us to do something that wasn't in our contract, that we are like, well, that takes a lot of time. So then we, in the contract, say, if you want, like, here's an instance. If you want us to fill the holes where the stakes were on asphalt, it's going to cost this much per hole. So we got to, fill it with sand. It takes time. So the contract is just going to let you know all the extra fees, if there are any, that should be disclosed in the logistical part when you're talking to people. It's also going to let you know our expectations. Like, I have a very big expectation that says before we show up, you need to have the lawn mowed, at least 1 day in advance, and you need to have approximate location of the tent. Like, you don't have to have it exact, but have something in the ground that shows us, because rental companies, we're labor. We want to show up and get to work immediately. We don't want to wait an hour talking to people being like, oh, this should go here, should go there, oh, move it here. We want to just show up and go, because it's very expensive. We pay our employees a lot. Our workers' comp is a lot. It's a lot to do this kind of labor. So we want to show up, immediately start unloading the truck and setting the tent up. I have in my contract that any delays, we're charging for it. Like, we show up all the time and the lawn's not mowed and we got to wait. And I said, well, we got to charge for that. And they don't understand why. And I understand that they don't understand why. But
well, yeah,
it's
because
a delay.
you haven't done it before. But that's, again, one of the reasons to read your contract and talk to your people, your rental people, about that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a delay. Like, if you have 20 people standing around waiting for you to mow a lawn, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so in my business, every hour that we're working costs me $350. So that's the charge you're going to get if I got to wait an hour for you to mow your lawn. And then a big thing that couples should understand is we're exactly just like a venue. Even though we're just portable, our deposit is non-refundable, because if you booked a venue and canceled, they missed out on all that opportunity to rent out their space to somewhere else. Well, same thing. We're missing out on the opportunity not just to rent the tent, but maybe the chairs you had could have went to another wedding. Maybe the tables could have went to another wedding, or an entire wedding could have had your basic exact setup. So
yeah, and your people.
Yeah, and my staff. So your deposit is us promising you that, and it cannot go to anyone else because we promised it to you. So your deposit is going to be the same as a venue. It's just not refundable.
Yeah, and that should be something that that couples are aware of across the board. It's the same with your planner. It's the same with your photographer. It's the same with your florals. Anything where I'm holding that date, that means that I may have turned down my personal life stuff too. I could have turned down attending. I've had to turn down attending weddings that I have booked. I've booked like my a client wedding and my friend's wedding I have then had to turn down. And that's happened before because, I've committed. And if you cancel, I can't now just buy a ticket like the next day and fly,
Right.
so it's, of course, and hopefully there's no reason that you will need to be canceling, especially, we've got things in pandemic world seem to be kind of buttoned up, a little bit in terms of being able to jigger things.
Right. Speaking of pandemic world, that is a big thing. So when people had to cancel because of in the beginning of all this, I gave all deposits back because it's an unforeseen event. It's unforeseen. You just can't plan for that. Now most rental companies have basically put in the contract, like, you understand that there's these risks in the world. If you don't go through with this tent, if you cancel, basically someone else is still going to do it. So it's
Yeah.
still the same situation. The deposit is non-refundable. You are understanding the risks.
Yeah. Well, and of course, like when we first went into the pandemic, we were legally not allowed to work in the wedding industry.
Right.
So it wasn't as it, and I was really super flexible with everybody as well. I think everybody, was pretty, like, did their best to be flexible, as long as they didn't have staff costs to cover. Cause that was another piece that was kind of sad and something, we don't need to like go too deep into, but you still want to take care of your people that work for you. So in that case, if then I as a client would understand, like, I still want your people to be able to eat and live and be able to get gas or whatever. Bare minimum things in life should be still given to people.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's a really important piece. I I I have only had one wedding that was canceled that was not related to the pandemic. And it is something that, I understand you, obviously, if you have to cancel your wedding at the last minute, it's a very hard thing to be doing. But you should be prepared to not receive deposits back.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not even last minute. We'll get people who cancel 2 weeks after, and
Wait,
it's
2 weeks. Oh,
yeah,
after
yeah,
booking.
two
I
weeks
was like,
after booking. Yeah, sorry, yeah, 2 weeks after booking because various reasons, obviously, but it's still not refundable because within those 2 weeks, I maybe turned down 5 people.
yeah,
Sometimes I'll try to, be cool about it and be like, if I can rebook all your equipment, we'll work something out. I can't give you it all
yeah,
back because we put time into this. We've made
yeah,
diagrams. We've met with you. We've maybe done a site visit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's absolutely accurate. And I try to be cool about things like that too. And I'm glad, I think most people do. Nobody like feels great being like, "Hey, I'm just going to take your money."
Right.
Kind of thing. So, yeah. The other thing I want to touch on that we talked a little bit about during the break was table sizes. I know we're talking about tents here, but that is a big piece of logistics in terms of, that the amount of people, the number of tables you think are going to fit the number of people is going to change the size of the tent. So, can you talk a little bit about table size and number of people that can comfortably fit at a table?
Yeah. So everything on the tent is going to be going into what size tent you need. So a lot of people want to get 6 foot rounds, which seat 10 people, as opposed to a 5 foot round, which seats 8 people. So intuitively, you just think you're going to be able to fit more people in. However, there's a huge, giant dead space in round tables. So 6 foot rounds need a 12 by 12 area in order to be able to, just walk through. Everyone's comfortable not having to squeeze. 5 foot rounds need a 10 by 10 area. So say you've got a tent that's 40 feet wide. In that 40 feet, you can fit 4 5-foot rounds in 4 10 by 10 areas. That totals 32 people. In that same area, the 6-foot round, 12 by 12 space, you can only fit 3. And then that exponentially goes down the tent. Once you start adding more and more rows, it's just taking up more and more space. So if you do 6-foot rounds, you need a much larger tent than 5-foot rounds. So always go with the 5-foot rounds if you're going for round. The 6-foot round in a tent is really used for, like, we have a family of 10 people, we can't break them up. So you put them there. But if the entire tent is 6-foot rounds, you're going to need a much, much larger tent. Alternatively, 8-foot banquet tables, you can fit way more in. They have a much smaller footprint. So you could fit 1.5 times the amount of people that you would be able to fit at 5-foot rounds if your setup was banquet tables. So 6-foot rounds, although they're cool, you can get a bunch of people at them. They actually don't save any space. They require much more.
That's such a great point. And from the actual guest experience, you're so much further away from the other side of the table, and to have conversations with the people next to you is much less comfortable than it is at a banquet table. In terms of my own experience, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about a wedding that I attended where it was like the people across couldn't hear you at all.
Right.
It was just so, because you've got music playing. It's not the same as like going to dinner or whatever. But that it makes sense to me that it has a larger footprint because my voice doesn't carry as far.
Right. Yeah, no, I hate 6-foot rounds.
That's so interesting. That's a great point. I'm glad that you brought that up. So before we close out, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about venues and if you have any suggestions, do's and don'ts kinds of things for venues that need to work with a rental company or tent rental company.
Yeah, so if it's a venue contacting directly, or the couple have rented the place at the venue and there's an intermediary, it's still the same thing. We need to know all the logistics of where to back up, where to pull in, how tall things are. If we have to go under something to get to the venue, our trucks are sometimes 13 feet tall. And then
great point.
Venues got to understand that if they require like the rental company to come pick up at midnight because they got another wedding the next day, there's going to be a massive charge. Because if I have to send people out at midnight to pick stuff up, I can't then expect those same employees to be in at 8 o'clock the next day. So I either got to find other people or hire some like temp people that aren't going to be that great. So late night pickups at a venue, if it's required, is very expensive.
That's a really good point. And that's something for couples to be aware of as well, because, that might be a charge that then gets kicked to you.
Yeah. We hate them. We prefer to do at least 1 day in advance and 1 day to 2 days later. But if it's a place that does a Friday wedding, Saturday, and a Sunday wedding to maximize profits, they need that stuff in and out, and someone's going to be paying for it.
Ideally, those venues would talk to their couples and say, there will be a tent set up at this location. Would you also like to use it? And then upcharge the couple.
Right.
That would make sense for the venue, but not great for the or like the couple then gets a discount because it's already set up, and maybe that gets passed along to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or even Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday team. And then that would be the ideal situation for everyone. Like, hey,
Right.
This tent is here, as long as the couple, of course, wants it.
Yeah, exactly. We've come into situations like that where, Friday wedding and Saturday wedding needed the same size tent at this particular venue. And I had to talk to the venue owner because they were like, oh, you should pay 50% and they should pay 50%. And I yelled at the venue owner, like, you can't do that, because if they don't get this tent, I would have picked it up that morning. This is more in a catering tent situation. I would have picked that up that morning and brought it somewhere else and got 100%. So the most I'm going to do is maybe 15% discount to each of them. It's not a 50-50. They don't get to pay 100%, but 50 here and 50 there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. And then do you have any recommendations for wedding planners? I mean, rentals are such a big part of the wedding planner's portfolio when being booked by a couple. Do you have any like do's and don'ts, pro tips for our planners out there who are looking to build their relationship so that they have this really great rental company? Because that's a huge piece of a planner. You know, the logistics, they take care of all that stuff. So it having a good rental company to work with is a really big deal for a planner.
Yeah, because a planner doesn't want to be a rental company. They don't want to own all this stuff as well. They just want a resource to go get it from. Okay, so when we get phone calls from rental planners, and this is across the board, I've talked to hundreds of rental companies on these Facebook pages. We're like, oh my God, they're calling. Because in general, there's so many planners out there that the bad ones outweigh the good ones, and it's just like a bad experience. Planning is in the name, and what we find is that most are incapable of planning. I have a few that we have no problem with. We love working with them. So what happens is the planner doesn't give us logistics. The planner doesn't give us anything, any information. They don't tell us there's a tiny elevator, and then we're surprised, and then we charge the planner, and then the planner's like, oh, my margin's gone. So planners are sometimes very difficult to work with. In order to be a good planner and have a good relationship with a rental company, you want to give the rental company all the logistics of the site. The good planners send, even though the information's not that important to us, they send that entire list of like what everyone's expected, like the photographer, timelines and stuff. The planner should pay deposits the same the customer does. It's just good etiquette. You're still a customer unless you have worked something out. A lot of times planners want discounts, which I understand. But so in my experience, what's happened is I get planners in all the time. They come in and say, I'm going to give you so much business. Give me a 10, 20% discount straight from the beginning, blah, blah, blah. In the beginning, I was like fooled by that. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah, this is going to be awesome. And then they only use you here and there. They tend to think, this is in my area, they tend to think that they are our biggest customers and that they're very, very important to us. When in reality, like they order so much, like they just don't do the quantity that they think they're doing in their head. Like I can just go to one wedding and make 10 times the amount of what they've done in the past 3 years. So they're not that important to us. The rental company is more important to the planner than they are to us. But they think that they're more important. So they want all these discounts. So most rental companies that have gone through this experience will be like, all right, once you reach $100,000 in rentals from us, then we'll talk about a discount, because we want you to prove that you're actually what you're going to say you are. We're not just going to believe you. And be like a couple. You call in advance. Don't call the week of being like, oh, I need this for this wedding. If you've had that wedding on your books for 6 months, you should have had the rentals organized for 6 months. A lot of times planners will just call rental companies at the last minute and then be mad that we can't do it because we don't have it. So yeah, the good ones I work with are very excellent planners, logistic wise. They pay their bills on time. And they understand that they are not our most important customer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's something that's easy to fall into across the board with weddings, where you think, you're the most important piece, and sometimes, everybody's running a business. So, as much as you are incredibly important, you may not be the most important. So, that is a great piece of advice. And
I sounded
of course,
sorry, I sounded like I went off on them. There's definitely good experiences, but like I said, all the companies I talk to when a wedding planner calls, we're just like, oh my God. You don't want to be that company. You want to be the one where like, oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, exactly. The problem with bad experiences, especially in this industry, is that they stand out so much more than the good experiences, because generally speaking, the good experiences are great experiences. And that's the the majority of them. But when it's a bad one, it's so bad that it's like you've got like 7 different stories from that one experience that shouldn't have happened to begin with. So it makes it, it's so bad that it like becomes like a, it sticks out.
Right.
Unfortunately, I totally get it. And that's also one of the reasons when you are choosing a planner as a couple, to really talk to them about like their expertise and not just the face value things, but ask them like the questions, do you have a rental company that you prefer to work with? Will you provide all the logistics? I think that's a great question to ask them, because the last thing you want is you're not having all of the setup done, or there can be a whole bunch of things that can happen if the planner is busy dealing with something that they didn't plan for. They didn't tell you that the elevator was a teeny tiny elevator that's really only intended for like one person that weighs 150 pounds or something. Like, then that's going to take a very long time to get your stuff up and down the elevator.
Yeah.
So, I think making sure that you're hiring a good planner as a couple is really, really important. And not just for their portfolio or their Instagram, ask them the questions.
Yep. There's a wedding planner in my area. She can't get anything from any rental companies in the area because she's burned so many bridges with us. She needs to go 2-3 hours away to get things in. So it'd be cool to know that, that your wedding planner is well respected among the event community.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you can ask your other, if you don't hire your planner first and you hire your venue first, you can ask if they have a preferred planner, one that they generally like working with, that kind of thing, or if they have a few. And you can ask your photographer if you get your rentals first, which clearly is not a bad idea. Then you can ask your rentals people. We all know each other. It's a very, unless we're traveling and it's a destination for all of us, then we tend to know each other, and we know the good ones. We know the ones that aren't as good, and we know the ones that are going to fit your needs too, after we've had a conversation with you. So don't be afraid to ask your vendors for referrals to, they'll be honest with you.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today, Adam, and joining us on the Wedding Dish. Where can people find you online?
So I have a YouTube channel all about the event rental industry. It's more geared to teaching people how to start the same business I'm in. And that's called The Tent Guy and other entrepreneur stuff. But if you just search The Tent Guy, I pop up right on YouTube.
And we'll link out to that as well. And again, Adam is in the central New York area. So New York State, not the city, not downtown, just to be clear on that. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being here. This was a great conversation. It's fun to talk about some of the more logistical things that a lot of times we talk about like the more aesthetics or whatever on this podcast. So it's kind of fun to use that part of my brain. So I appreciate you coming on here. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Wedding Dish. I so appreciate you all. And if you want to find us online, you can go to theweddingdishpodcast.com. You'll be able to read our show notes. You'll get the links for if you want to follow up with Adam, the tent guy. You can apply to be a guest. And all the good stuff there. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Wedding Dish Podcast. And you can send us episode ideas. You can send us questions for when we do our listeners' questions episodes. And don't forget to tune in next week. We have another exciting episode coming up. And until then, cheers.